Weddings.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for coming to our speakers event tonight. This is an event that's been hosted by the Cowichan Watershed Board for close to 10 years now, and we do this in partnership with the VIU, who provides the venue, and funding for these efforts is from the Watershed Security Fund from the province of BC. So our gratitude to them. I would just like to tell you a little bit about me. I am the most senior member of the Cowichan Watershed Board. Tim Kolcheski has served the same length as me, so we're the two people that are still serving life sentences on the Watershed Board. No time off for good behavior, apparently. And I am officially the unofficial grumpy old man of the Cowichan Watershed Board. David Slade would be my name. Thank you for asking the question.
Reminding you.
So we are really grateful for the dozens of enlightening and engaging speakers that we've had over the years. And tonight we are going to be drilling down, as a water well driller like myself likes to do, into things around the aquifers, the groundwater, and the surface water in the Koksilah watershed. Before I do that, I would like to acknowledge that tonight we are gathered here on the land, the unceded land of the Cowichan people, and I would like to invite Elder Philomena Suquela, no, I did it wrong, Mina Williams, to please come up and give us a welcome. Thank you.
Nice to know we have a grumpy old man in our midst. I and Buxwet, I can see Lunala, and east of and enjoy tonight. It's so special to have a special person in our midst as well. Oh, you're all special. We have an extra special person. But I'd like to read you a poem from Uli K. It's called, I Don't Want to Watch the News. Some of you may have seen this one. I want to watch the sunrise as it collides with the sky. I want to watch how the birds gather for the day, and they don't worry about tomorrow. I want to watch the rivers bend with determination to go where they want, without stopping to ask why. I don't want to watch the news. I want to watch the rainbows that remind me of a promise. I want to watch the curious little squirrels as they balance themselves on the fence like tightropes and nibble at sunflower seeds. I want to watch dust flow through the atmosphere and remember that we are merely delicate creatures with unstoppable souls. I don't want to watch the news. I want to watch humanity grow kinder, hearts grow softer, and smiles grow bigger. I want to watch people doing better things like sharing their stories and climbing their mountains. I want us to love more and not judge, and give more than we take and learn from our mistakes. I don't want to watch the news. I want to watch how beautiful it is to be still. I'm going to leave you with my Peter. He was an alcoholic. Every Christmas his mom gave him a flashlight so that he would see the light. And by golly, before she died, he did stop drinking. It was a miracle. And he lived so he just loved to learn all of the things that was there that he hadn't seen as an alcoholic. So with our watershed, we do have hope, and we have to believe in that. And don't watch the news.
Thank you, Mina. I'd like to elaborate a little bit on the term that we often use, the unceded territory. So what does that really mean? That means that we're talking about the land on which we all live and work and play. It's land that was taken without treaty, without negotiations, without compensation. It's stolen land. When we say we're living on the unceded land, we're living on the stolen land of the first peoples of this land. And I think that it's really important for us to acknowledge that. And I think we are so lucky that there are First Nations leaders and elders who are prepared to share their wisdom and their guidance with us and lead us down the essential, but I think it's going to be a rough and rocky road towards reconciliation. So I'm so grateful that we have people like Mina who are prepared to share their guidance and their wisdom and walk with us together to a future that I think is going to be better for all of us and all of our grandchildren. So thank you very much once again, Mina, for your leadership and your guidance. We are very, very lucky today to have Kristine Disney with us. She's going to talk to us extensively about the watershed, the interplays between, the magical interplays, mysterious and magical, between groundwater and surface water. And despite of her name, I'm just going to get this question right off the table. In spite of the fact that her name is Disney and she has a great affinity for water, she's no relation to Donald Duck, right? No relation to
Not
Donald.
Donald. There'll be some other Disneys, but not that.
So anyways, I would like to thank Christina. She's a researcher at UVic. She's doing her PhD. And we are so excited to join us. For the past 4 years, she's been working with the community and citizen scientists amongst our community to research and map the connections between groundwater and surface water. And tonight we're going to get to hear some of the learnings from that work. And I just want to share a personal story about my experience in the Koksilah and the connection between groundwater and surface water. So I don't know if anybody has ever been walking through the shallows in your bare feet in a river like the Koksilah. And in the summertime, it doesn't get warm, but it gets bearable. And then every so often you come upon a spot that is just like ice cold. It's like water that's coming out of the refrigerator. Has anybody ever experienced that? Do you find that? Yeah, well, if you look down, you can see the water boiling out through the gravel sometimes, through the sand. And so that's the surface water, the groundwater that's coming in and recharging in the river. And you can feel it and you can see it. And sometimes when you're swimming in the water, you'll be swimming along and you come across a warm spot in water. Have you ever experienced that? Well, that's just the guy that's upstream. So Christina,
Where's that?
lights. Who's in charge of lights?
You are.
All right. Well, while the lights are going on, hi everyone. My name is Christina. Some of you are familiar faces who I got to say hello to on the way in. And if I didn't get to say hello, I hope you come give me a hug before you leave. And for the new faces, maybe you can still give me a hug when you leave. I'm good with that if you are. We'll see how our time together goes. Just a few things. I'm going to take a page from Mina there, and this is speaking mostly for myself. I know I need this, so it's an invitation in case anyone else does. It's a busy world. It's a busy place. It's really hard to learn new things when we're already really full. And so the invitation is I'm taking a really big deep breath, let it out, let the day out, try and be an empty cup. Not an empty cup without your own thoughts and things like that, but make some space. Make some space for hopefully what I can share and arguably what I'm also hopefully going to learn from all of you in the time we spend together. So, all right, so big breath. Nice. All right. We have a good chunk of time together, so I'm gonna break rules a tiny bit. I'm gonna present, but I'm gonna make an invitation. I'm gonna do my best to pay attention to everyone in the room. If you want to ask questions along the way, I'm gonna see how inquisitive you all are. If we get a bajillion questions, I'll rein us in. But if we have some kind of popcorn style throughout it, I'll let it expand that way. Or if you want to wait till the end, that's kind of normally how these things go. But let's think about it more, hopefully like a dialogue if we would like to. So you're welcome to ask questions along the way if you want me to clarify something. Or if an idea kind of slips by and you're like, wait a minute, I didn't get a hold of that. Then yes, because if you were someone who thought that, there's a very good chance that someone else in that room is probably having the same thought. Does that sound like a good arrangement?
Sounds excellent.
Awesome, love it. Okay, so just want to start off. In the same way that there are many people here who have been working on this project on the ground, there are many people, I always think about it as whose hand is on my shoulder. And often we throw around big institutional names, but just in the same way that the people in here are very real people, the people behind these institutions are very real. And we've been working together really for the last 4 or 5 years, right? So that's, we are officially partnered with Cowichan Tribes, with the Koksilah Watershed Working Group, with the Watershed Board, and with the province. And we've all kind of been muddling through this together, trying to figure out as much as we possibly can. So I'm hoping, in the time that we have together, we can get through, oops, is this the one I want? Oh, this isn't even the original one I want, but that's okay. The original one that I want is slipped to the back, so I'm just going to do a little cheat, because I changed my questions, and it didn't transfer through. 1 second, folks, let me see which one I'm in here. This is hilarious. I'm in the wrong presentation. Pull that button. I think we're the speakers bureau, right? You've gotten to that one? Let me get there. It's a great way to start, hey? This should go much better. Okay, so I'm hoping in our time together we can answer what is groundwater? Why do we care about groundwater in the Koksilah watershed? How is a river's health dependent on groundwater surface water interactions? And then finally, now that we can characterize those interactions, how does that help us? Ultimately, the goal is to move something along, right? Knowledge for knowledge's sake is fun for the inquisitive, but this has a lot of impacts. We want to trace some of those impacts if we can. All right. We're already doing better. We're in the right program right now. So much better. So, what is groundwater? Let's peel this back to something you may have not seen maybe since grade school. If you're me, you literally live and breathe this stuff and think about it all the time, but I have to remember that not everyone in this room spends their day thinking about the water cycle. I brought this up. I was monitoring once and I brought up something and this carpenter was like, do you know how to do joists? And I was like, nope, that's fair enough. We all have our own specialties. And also, we also know a lot about this intuitively, but we often kind of forget about certain parts of it, right? So just really, really simply, we think about, if we start in the ocean and we're a water molecule, we get evaporated from the ocean, we go hang up in the clouds, that's really nice, we get rained down. And when we get rained down, we can go through multiple different paths. We can have multiple different journeys. We might hang out in the river and then get sent back to the ocean. We might be in a lake, we might actually get evaporated, we might get drank up by a tree. But when we talk about groundwater, we're talking about what has infiltrated below our feet. And if there's any soil scientists in the room and you're hiding out on me, we can get real nitty-gritty about this. But anything that we're going to call groundwater, for the sake of today's conversation, and what's a pretty good general definition, is that in the ground, think about when you water your plant, right? Some of that moisture sort of trickles through the soil, but eventually you fill it up enough that the bottom of your little container is full, the bottom of the pot is full. Anything that's below that saturated line, that is what we're calling groundwater. So anything below the water table, right? If you were to dig a hole, dig, or if you're digging on the sand, it's really quick and easy, right? That water, you see that water flood in. So that's what we're going to be calling groundwater. We get really fancy when we use the word aquifer, because it's, sounds pretty fancy and special. All that really means is that you are a body of material that holds water, and the water can move through you. Sometimes that's in bedrock, so that's in those cracks and those pores, and it sort of follows them like this fun little snaking trail. Sometimes it hits dead ends, doesn't have anywhere to go. Sometimes that's in things like sand and gravel, which is nice. It's got lots of pore space, so it can fill up a lot of water. The downside is it can also lose that water really quickly. And so there's consequences. There's pros and cons to the type of material that it can hold, or that's capable to hold. Just a real quick aside. So if you go to the 1980s, I looked this up because I wanted to be specific. You can go to the Glossary of Geology. And if you go to that definition, an aquifer is a body of rock that has an economic yield, that has enough, it holds enough water to be economic. So I bring that up because when we talk about aquifers that have been mapped here in BC, most of those were mapped during a time when we only cared if they were economically functioning, right? We now acknowledge that ecological functions are pretty darn important too. And so when we think about what is an aquifer, there's actually lots that we don't map because at the time, no one had a house there or no one was drilling and needed it, so they didn't map it, right? And so the way that we think about water, there's water in the ground just about everywhere, right? But so kind of shifting, it goes beyond the map, and I'm going to come back to that thought in a little bit. So how much water, I kind of gave a little bit of a hint there, how much water is actually underneath of our feet? A whole heck of a lot, right? And I think it's, so everyone in the room, imagine the biggest lake you've been to. Just try to imagine the most amount of water you've ever seen, not including the ocean, right? Think about all the rivers, all the lakes. Think about how much water you can really imagine, right? So out of all of the world, 98% of it is saltwater, 2% of it is fresh water. And if you zoom in and you look at that 2%, actually most of that's ice. Most of that is hanging out at our poles or high up in our mountains. So those rivers and lakes, it's 1% of the 2%. It's this teeny tiny amount of the whole thing. So for all the water that you can imagine, times it by 12. Really, it's an inconceivable amount of it. We can't even, it's trying to imagine we can't imagine. There's so much water under our feet. It's connecting all of us, it's connecting all of this water system, but it gets forgotten because it's not tangible. You can't touch it, you can't take, you can only see it once it comes to the surface. That's when we start to have an interaction, so we have to start to have a dialogue with it. So even though you might not realize you're seeing it and using it all the time, if we look at groundwater worldwide, we are talking about essentially half of the world's domestic water use is coming from groundwater. 43% gets used for irrigation. And so there's just a huge amount of water that we're using all the time. So just out of curiosity in this room, whose house is on a well? You raise your hand. Nice, quite a few people, okay. And then from those who already have the well, or if you don't have, or either way, is your garden, or are you growing any food from that well water? A few hands, yeah, so most people know that too. Okay, who has eaten food that was grown with water from the ground? And this is a trick question because every single person's hand in this room should go up. Thank you. Yeah, if you don't know that, yeah. So whether you thought you were connected to groundwater 2 seconds ago, every single person here is. You might have eaten it this morning. You might have eaten it last week. Either way. And again, that's not talking about drinking. We'll get into that another way. But you've all eaten food that is grown with groundwater. You should all care about that water. I'm gonna just impose that statement on you while we're thinking this one through. Good, so we're gonna care about groundwater. Why do we care about it here, right? Well, I think sometimes it's good to think about what here means to us. So I hope they got relatively distributed in a way that was accessible. I know there's a few stacks and pens everywhere. These are some local places. I borrowed this from the website, from the planning process website, so here's where this came from. One side has some sciencey things on that. We're going to learn the sciencey things. We'll get there, don't worry. But I mean, I can do it a couple ways first, but these are some places that you've probably been, or maybe not if, in the last couple weeks, you might have been there this summer. Was anyone at Bright Angel Park this summer? I would say 3/4, if not 90% of the room. Did anybody fill up with gas at the Glenora store? Anything like that? Got a few people, right? So I'm just gonna give you guys, and hopefully pens got distributed too. So I'm gonna just give us 2 minutes. Well, that's not time. And I want you to write on there some places that you care about in the watershed. And that can be anything, I mean, it can be water related. You know, it might be a spot on the river, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And if you haven't actually been in the watershed and you're just here to learn about, that's amazing. You can write on the side some places about water that are important to you outside the watershed. But I'm just going to give us, I got a timer going. I'll give us 2 minutes. And just write some places that matter to you. And we're going to come back at the end to this. So, whether you live in the watershed or not, it's a pretty unique and special place. And so, right, we talked about, you know, us where we're standing right now, we're on the unceded traditional territory of the Cowichan. If we think about Koksilah and what this picture is here, this is Koksilah River, which again contains the origin stories of where the first man fell from the sky. So it's just, I mean, it's been a very special place for a very long time. And today, there are so many people that call this place home. And I'm going to say people all the way from, you know, fish, all the way up to various folks that are coming in there to kayak, to farm, some people growing vineyards, right? It's been home, it means home for a lot of different people, and it's been a special place for a lot of different people. There's around 1,100 water users. When we think of that from sort of any of those bigger water uses coming in that way. Ballpark, 15 to 20% of it is agriculture, 75-ish is forestry. And for all of these lovely traits, one of the things that makes it special, or one of the things that makes it unique, is not so great. I recognize you can't read this, you are not intended to read it in its entirety, but this is a temporary fish protection order. If you're in this room, you may or may not know that this document exists. It is actually it's a triplet. One of these came out in 2019, 2021, and 2023. And these orders came in, which essentially were meant to stop any commercial use of water because there was not enough water in the river for salmon to get upstream. Specifically, for salmon survival, or salmon species. We're thinking about steelhead in that sense, and we're thinking about coho predominantly. The critical threshold was set to 0.18 cubic meters per second, which means that anything below that was deemed by the province to inhibit survival, and so water use had to stop. And this has been in response to, I think, even if you didn't know this document existed, I'm pretty sure you noticed that we've kind of been in a drought the last, I was going to say few years, but I almost want to say decade. We've kind of been on this downward swing. This is an older drought map looking at 7 BC here. And the reason why I find it a bit of dark humor, because I moved here 2020 or so, 2021 I guess, and in the time that I've lived here, we've had to invent a 5th category of drought. This map is outdated. The response to drought has had to get so much more, we've had to take so many more actions. And so, this document and this increasing drought, it's actually not a brand new story. So what you're looking at here, this is a graph that shows the discharge, so that's what's on the y-axis, and the years is on the x-axis. So you're looking at all the way from about the mid-1950s up until 2019. And what these little dots are, each dot is what was the lowest flow of that year. That's what the 7-day weekly low flow means. In that year, what was the week with the lowest flow? And we've just been on our way down. If you were to continue those imaginary lines, that red line is that 0.18 I was talking about, where the alarm bells go off in our river. And we've essentially been hanging out near the alarm bell region for most of our summers, at least since I've started doing research here with everyone. So, well, certain things have certainly gotten worse. Why is it that these temporary fish protection orders have come in now, right? Well, it has to do with the BC government changing some things, and hopefully making change for the better. So, hopefully some context, depending on where you're jumping into this story. Some of this may be new, some of this may be a big repeat. But in 2014, 2016, depending on how you think about when it was enacted. The British Columbia government changed the Water Sustainability Act, and there's three things I'm going to bring up that affect kind of us here. So one is that they started licensing the use of water, groundwater, regulating groundwater. The second big one, which is that there's the recognition that surface water and groundwater are connected. And I'm just going to say this, it was always connected. Just someone finally decided on paper that it was connected. So it's crazy notion. That things are tied to environmental flow, so that red line, that uh-oh moment, we're like, okay, we should make decisions around those moments. Those are important. So environmental flows is kind of the big word for that one. And also part of this act was like, hey, maybe we should delegate decision making to a local entities. Maybe we should change how we do this so the people that actually live in these places can have, the people that care about it the most, let's see how they can show up. So I'm going to circle back. We're going to stick with the groundwater surface water things. That's kind of what I brought you all here for. So we're going to stick with that one. I said that before that on paper they recognized it, but groundwater and surface water have always been at play, right? And ultimately, humans just like to give boxes and names to things. We're calling this groundwater, I'm calling that a cloud. You could switch languages and it's the same thing. It's all just water. But in order for us, we need to put names on things to understand it. And we put names on things so that we can understand how to treat it. That's all the name does, right? So the water has always been connected. We call it groundwater, surface water, if we want, we're being formal. But how has that connection been really critical, and how does that come to play? So this is an example of what overpumping looks like. This is how overpumping can affect a neighbor or how it can affect a stream. So even though that well was never directly attached to the stream, imagine being really thirsty and you're sitting in a cafe with the straw and you suck all of it up, right? Well, you're going to pull all of that in. Fancy word is chromatic depression. And when that happens, you're actually capturing water that would have flown into the river. So even though you never took directly from the river, you took the water that would have got there. Maybe not intentionally, maybe not even knowing it. In this case, you just happen to be the person with the deepest well. So even though you're fine and life is chugging along and you're watering your garden and everything is great, the person next to you who maybe has an older, shallower well has no more water left, right? And in this case, we're showing it as someone with a well, but it can be that drop can happen even on its own, right? Just with passage of time. So when we zoom out, then this is just a little baby version, but this is looking at us. So Duncan's here in the middle. This is imagining sort of what the ground looks like underneath of us here. So we've got all old, really bedrock, and then we've got kind of all these deposits. That's why we have really great farming soil here, guys. This is why our region is arguably one of the oldest farmed ones on the island. We've got this really great soil left behind them from different eras. So thank geology for that one. But it's a pretty hard time to be a river if people are pumping water and and no foul by anyone, but everyone's building houses, they want to live here, there's a lot of development happening, and we want to feed a lot of people, right? It's a big, beautiful island, we've got this really great soil, so we're going to have some farms here, and that's going to be really lovely, so that's going to take some more water because they're thirsty. And then we've got all these trees, we've got these big forests that are getting planted, and they're all the same age, and they're all so thirsty because they're trying to grow up. They're trying to be a big tree so that they can establish themselves. So what if you have all of these thirsty factors coming in? Oh, and by the way, I'm going to tell you that climate change has just came in and shut off the rain in the summer. So everybody's super thirsty, and you're not going to get the rain you used to get 20, 30 years ago. That's over and done now. So it's a really hard time to be a river, right? And everyone wants a lot from you, and not in a mean, terrible way, but everyone's asking a lot. They're asking a lot of for you to perform. And so, in response to all of these demands, kind of what's being developed right now in real time is the Koksilah Watershed Plan. So, it is on track to be the first watershed that is co-governed between the province and between First Nations, so for us, Cowichan tribes. And this is really exciting. It has the potential to sort of change, to put water at the forefront, and not just water for any single one of those thirsty reasons, right? But for the river itself and for all of those. We want this to be a home for people for a very long time to come. Whether those people are people sitting in this room or are little fish swimming through a stream, that's kind of the big goal. So, yeah, let's try to move along here.
Kristine, can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Can you go back 2 slides?
Yes.
Okay, so your left hand shows a young forest. What do you call it? They're thirsty because they need to grow.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a bunch of trees growing. What about the trees that are being logged, cut down in massive numbers, and the effect that has on being a hard time to be a river?
Yeah. So I'm going to say that I will answer this question, part of it, and I also say that what we covered in here is completely different. As soon as you change the water cycle regardless. So all of those log trees have varying effects. In the summer, it can change how much water directly goes into the river. It changes how much water infiltrates. It changes the available moisture that it can be retained there. So when we think about logging, there's a few foresters in this room. We could have a multi-speaker series just on that one alone. For now, the little window I want you to view what I'm talking about is just summer. So if we were just talking about from, I'm going to say, middle of June to middle of September, the things that are taking water are the trees. The actual logged areas are not taking water, so they're not, or depending on what succession stage we're in, we'll get into a whole other thing with that. However, those log parts affected how much water got into the ground. So I'm going to focus us on just summer right now. We have a whole different narrative, and that's how come I only brought up the living trees for this. But that's your question. Anyone else before I keep rolling? Good. Yeah.
On that topic, one of the greatest reservoirs of water is in the mycelium of the mycorrhizal fungi in the soil, which is probably the biggest reservoir of all of it. And those are most developed in the old forest. And we don't have the old forest anymore. So that amazing reservoir of water is basically depleted and all of that. How does that factor into our availability of water?
So for folks in the back, I think this room projects pretty well, but Chris is talking about mycelium. So that's the fungal network that's hanging out in a well-established forest. And absolutely, if we think about an old-growth forest, you can imagine that from up to this podium, we're hanging out with moss, mycelium, detritus, all of that's going to hold water. From a groundwater perspective, from a hydrology perspective, a healthy watershed is a slow watershed. It means that the water comes in and it spends as much time with us in our watershed before it departs again. So anything that slows it down, anything that can increase infiltration, it's like paying it forward. If you can slow down that winter water, have it soak into the ground, it's going to pay you back in the summertime and slowly release that. So losses of any sort of storage like that come at a cost, right? And how do we get those back? Man, I don't know. Anyone got 1,000 years on hand? No? I don't think I'll still be standing here for that one. Yeah, I mean, I love this. There's so many, there's a lot of knowledge sitting in this room for each little corner of things that everybody knows. And in the time we have, there's no way to cover all of them, right? But I like that there's a lot of facets to this. And how do we put all of them together for the biggest benefit is ultimately, hopefully, what we're aiming for. Any other questions? Yeah.
Is that picture of the aquifer, is that based on the mill aquifer, or is that just a schematic of what it could look like?
This is so very generally, and this is a good one to pause on. So very generally, this is kind of how it looks. The pros and cons of conceptual models, that's what this is. It's just the concept of what you would expect. So the parts that I like about this, that I'll explain that I like that it shows that as you go up into the mountains, or hills, you get mostly bedrock and there's not really a lot of soil. So again, if I go back to this analogy, there's usually only 1 to 2 meters of soil for 3/4 of the water. Once you get into the up in where it's in forestry, there's not a lot of soil up there. It's mostly bedrock. So I like that it shows that. I like that as it comes down into the flat plains, that tan is supposed to represent sand and gravel. So I like that. What I don't like, because again, you can only show so much detail at a time, it's very homogeneous. Our valley is not homogeneous. Our valley is this mix of patches of clay, patches of till. Till is just like a mixed bag. It's like the candy bag where you don't even know what you got. Till has a big sizes, little sizes, so you don't really know what you get. And so because of that, the groundwater either has to move past it or under it or through it, and so it kind of, it's missing with that. But in general, just that idea that we go from the upper watershed, where bedrock is near the surface, and then we go down. And then depending on where you're from, you might know that you can hike and you actually do see the bedrock come back up there. Yeah. One more over here.
Will you be commenting at some point this evening on the notion that a river is a living thing? Is this river alive?
I think you should ask the river that.
I do.
That I think is both a belief system of an individual and a society, and I do not have time for that one. I have my own thoughts, we can talk about it later. But I'm gonna, for the sake of this, because I actually haven't even got to a lot of things, so I'm gonna keep us moving if that's okay. But I like it. I like the questions are coming out. It's great. I just want to keep us so we can get through most of the nitty-gritty. So, the goal, my work exists inside of a larger project. I'm working within a project called Koksilah Connections. One of my coworkers is here and there with me. Thanks, Jennifer. So there's a few of us that are working on this. For context, I've been working with community on the monitoring side, so what is happening. I have a counterpart who spent the last few years modeling land use and some of the other questions that are coming up here. He's been working on that. So I want to switch us over into how is river health dependent on groundwater surface water interactions. And if we're going to understand that, we first need to understand how can groundwater and surface water even interact in the first place. So as simple as I can, these are the 3 most common relationships that occur. And I'm going to talk about this always from the stream's perspective. So that means that if the first picture on your left is showing you is the notion of a gaining stream. So that means that in the surrounding landscape, in the aquifers surrounding the river, right, so it's that body of water that can hold, body of rock that can hold water, there is more water in the landscape, so it has a higher pressure here, so it moves into the river and it fills up the river. In the summertime, that's great. That means that we're getting nice, we're getting flow in the river. What we don't really want as much, or sometimes it can't be helped, but what we don't want is in the summertime is called a losing river. So it actually means that the aquifer has less water relative to the stream, and the stream is actually feeding the landscape now. So it's losing to the surrounding aquifer, to the surrounding area. And then the third one, way on the right over there, is disconnected. And that happens when the water table can be various reasons. Sometimes it's because it's never been allowed to touch. Sometimes there's a layer in there of material that says, nope, we're actually going to seal this off. Sometimes it's just because the water table actually drops below and they're no longer connected. So just really quickly, think about driving down the road and you're watching those water droplets, and it's raining and the water droplet hits your window and then it joins the next water droplet and moves really fast. So when they're disconnected, they don't have as much of a conversation together, but when they're connected, they're able to sort of have that flow back and forth. And then it changes a lot of what we can do. So these relationships change in both space and they change in time. That is what makes this so hard to figure out. So not only can we not see groundwater, touch it directly, but it's continually changing depending on how, it's always just, it's inbound, everything that's going on around it. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to walk through this couple different ways. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to imagine that we're all going to sit on one spot of the river, and we're going to sit beside that one spot for the whole summer. So what would that look like? If we were to sit down, we were to pick, in your head, pick your favorite spot on the river, in theory, and we're going to sit there for the summertime. In June, May or June, the land is still full of lots of water. The snow melt has happened, we've got those spring rains event, and everything is saturated and muddy. You know, the farmers hopefully have gotten out on their field by that point, but there's, you know, even some of the fields are still kind of half flooded, depending on when they're getting out there. And so at that point in time, all of that water is coming from the land and feeding the river. Great, love, good. In a good summer, the land still has that abundance of water, that aquifer is still full, and it continues to feed it. So it's less over time, and that's, hopefully there's enough of the distinction here, it's kind of playing around with this. So there's less of a difference, so it's still feeding some in, but it's like the tap is on, but the tap is with less pressure. You know, imagine you just kind of slowly turn it off. So that's, the landscape's still feeding, but it's not feeding as much. In a bad summer, right, when we're worried about, do we have enough water in our river for our fish? We still start off in June. We start off great, lovely, good. But then what happens is that, the water table has receded too much. Maybe it's because it was crazy hot and dry and it all evaporated. Maybe it's because we irrigated a lot or we had a car wash for a month in July. I don't know. Who knows? But we've used up too much of our water, and now the river has to start feeding the surrounding area again. Not so great, right? And so understanding, are rivers shifting into that? Do all the rivers shift to that? Do any of them shift to that? It's kind of what we spent the last few years sorting out. But what happens, why do we get a good summer and why do we get a bad summer? Why are those two things? Well, we have to think about how aquifer recharge works. This is a new analogy, so we'll see how this one plays out. I want you to think about the pitcher is now your aquifer. It's your jug. And if we think about it, there's a little bit of water in there, and all that water has minerals mixed in it, so it's kind of like your concentrated juice, right? And then what happens is that it gets filled up, diluted, and then at the end, ideally, we've got a nice OJ that we're all drinking, and that's what's flowing into our river and keeping it going. That's kind of how recharge works. So if we think about the annual cycle of groundwater, and we think about how that works, we can start putting some timestamps on that. So I'm going to start this from October, especially when we start water years, but it's kind of a simple time because it's when the aquifer's most depleted. It's spent the whole summer feeding the river, and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm exhausted. So at that time, it's at its most concentrated version. And then what's going to happen is hopefully from November to May-ish, let's say it's going to rain a lot. That rain is going to seep through, hopefully some mycelium and a lot of other fun things. It's going to seep in, and it's going to get into the aquifer. Yes, love it. We're filling up the aquifer throughout the winter time. And when that fresh water joins the existing water, that older water down there, it's going to mix. It's going to make some lovely OJ. And then in June, we're going to start minusing. So in June, it's going to get hot, and the rain shuts off. Ish, usually. I'm being very simple right now. And that means that it's going to start getting more and more concentrated again, right? And it's going to continue to do that all the way until it rains again. So depending on when we get to, maybe it's August or September, but it'll eventually get back to that most concentrated version of itself. And that most concentrated version does have, there's less water to go around, right? So we have to be able to do more with less, hopefully. Oh, there's my building cloud. So in a good summer, right, we start off with our diluted water coming in from the aquifer, feeding the river. Remember, precipitation is, these days, we're lucky if we get any consistent summer storms, right? They make a huge relief when they do come, but for this narrative, I'm just pretending it doesn't rain at all, because we've lost the ability to rely on that to recharge the system. So in a good summer, we start off with diluted groundwater, and by the time we get to September, we still got like some decent OJ left, right? In a bad summer, we have, so in a good summer, we get to September, and what I want you to remember is that at the end of a good summer, we have a high flow from the aquifer into the river, and it's at a low concentration. In a bad summer, we get down to, it's like, if you're, imagine being super thirsty and having to just drink the concentrate from the can. It's not very nice, you're probably gonna feel sick, right? So in a bad summer, we have a bunch of water loss, or we've lost way more water, and in that scenario, we're gonna have low flow, so a low volume is entering the river, and it's at a higher concentration. So, you guys still with me? Talking about juice. Yeah.
When you're speaking of concentrations, you're meaning the mineral content that's been contributed to the groundwater by the minerals because of its time in the aquifer, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
I'm doing all of this so I can teach you guys about base flow index. Exactly. So what Dave is talking about, so the concentration is the amount of minerals that have been dissolved in. When you think about a cloud rains down, there's no minerals in that water. The moment a water drop hits the ground and starts making its journey through the world, through the terrestrial world, it dissolves things along the way. And so it picks up minerals, and we track those minerals. And then ultimately, the ratio of how that relationship changes through the summer tells us how reliant is the stream on groundwater, right? So the whole concentration system is just a fancy way of saying, how reliant are you on groundwater, little stream? And so our groundwater is our juice from concentrate, and then fresh water is whatever got poured in, right? So, and this is not so much a surprise. I'm going to say this a lot. Sometimes science is just to prove what most people would already guess, but everyone just feels better once we've all agreed on a common language of how we can show it. I think that's all science actually is half the time. Or maybe this is a surprise. Sorry, I spent so much time with this. So by August, the majority of the streams in the watershed are depending at least 75% on groundwater. So simple way to say that is the Koksilah Watershed depends on groundwater in August. Most of the flow is coming from that. You know, there's the odds, there's the odd lake, there's the odd wetland, and they are there, and they are prevalent. But the stream flow, what is keeping this alive, what is allowing you to swim in the river, allowing the fish to be there, allowing people to withdraw, irrigate, that came from the ground, right? It infiltrated in the winter and in the spring, and it has now come back out of the ground, and we can tell because of the minerals that it's brought with it. And that is what's keeping this place going in the summer, right? That is what's so critical for that. All right, are we with me on base flow? Okay. So that's as if we sat and we watched one spot for a whole summer. Now I want you to instead imagine we're in a day. Now the same thing is going to happen. So now we're thinking about things in space. You can walk a section of the river, and as you walk down it, kind of goes back to what David was saying, where if you walk and you can feel the temperature change as you go, right? What you're experiencing is the river switching from gaining and losing conditions. In some spots, as you move down the stream, the way the river is built, it's going to be gaining groundwater. You can feel that cold coming in. In some spots, it's going to be warm, hopefully not from the swimmer in front of you. And that's when actually the river, just the way that it's built, the material that it's made out of, right, it's going to actually feed water back in. So if we go for a walk, this is averaged over a month, this is averaged over a day. These are all the sites that folks have been monitoring over the last few years. And I'm just going to see where I'm at slide-wise here. I'm going to speed this along a tiny bit here. So what this is showing us, again, is that really most of our summer, even though it's summertime, even though we're at low flows and things are getting harsh, all these are still blue. Blue still means that we're gaining groundwater, right? And the few red that do pop up are concentrated. This is the lower watershed. So if you guys remember that map of, where the hub and Lenore Cafe and Bright Angel, things like that, right? So if maps aren't your thing, the simple version of that is that the upper watershed is nearly all gaining. So even in the summertime, it's still gaining groundwater. And in the lower watershed, we have some streams that are losing. So they're not connected to groundwater. They don't have that reliant source. And so the question often is, well, why? The why question kicks in. And ultimately, you have to look at the bones. You have to look at the geology. This is just a bunch of colorful polygons of all the different types of geology. Don't worry, we're not going to jump into that. But I want to go back to this image. The type of material that it flows through means that it's going to have a different relationship. So I kind of alluded to it a little bit, sand and gravel can fill up with a lot of water, but can also give it up really quickly. This silty, what they're calling a silt layer here, or this can be clay in some cases. Imagine you've got like a really beautiful piece of chocolate cake and you want to pour caramel sauce all over it. If it already has an icing on it, the sauce doesn't go in, right? It's really quite sad. If you're clever, you chop off the icing, you pour the sauce on it, and then it soaks in, then you can mix the icing back in. So if you have a bunch of fine grains like clay or silt or something like that, it can actually stop the water from going through. So each different type of geologic material got there in a different way. It has a different story. If you're a geologist, that's how you look at it. But what I want to look at is how does water see the watershed? And so what you're looking at here is I took all those polygons and I said, which ones behave the same way for water? What does water care about? Water cares about how easily can I flow through something? How much can I fill up something, really? So all the white part that you're looking at there, that is essentially thin soil over bedrock. So there's not a lot for water to hang out in. It's really quite thin. It can go into some of those cracks, but not all, it's mostly solid rock over thin soil, maybe a meter or two. The dark gray that you're seeing over here, that is some sand and gravel that's buried underneath of another layer. So it's there's some big pores for it to hang out in, but maybe you can access it, maybe you can't. Oh, I got a question up in the back.
Just a quick on that. So it's interesting, so you're saying these coarse grain zones, that is actually tied to also your high infiltration zones in the watershed too as well, right?
Yes, if it depends on what's on top. So go back to the cake and the icing reference. If the coarse grain is the layer underneath and it never has a chance to see it, you don't get infiltration. So that's the thing when I said that the lower watershed is more complex than that. The lower watershed has coarse grain and fine grain, but it's often buried underneath I said that till, that mixed bag. And so we don't, it's very hard just from maps alone to be like, this section you can access this thing. So trying to figure out where water can infiltrate in the lower watershed can be it's a real tricky beast.
But in the upper watershed, it's pretty clear where your key spots are, correct?
Yeah, and so even here, so this really dark patch that you're seeing, this is coarse grain over poorly sorted. And where it can infiltrate, holy smokes, exactly, right from the get-go, this is a hugely important to summer flows. And I'm going to keep this focus all the time. All of this work is to solve summer low flow issues. There's the rest of the year that's not being considered here. So when you talk about this, like this is a really important area, it's important for summer flows. The whole watershed is still important for winter flows. So I just wanted to throw that caveat in, because I find we can put on the line. Nice. And then, so then that light gray again is then where we have more of those fine grains showing up, and we don't know how well water's interacting there. Still with me? All right, okay. Okay, so, all right, doing good. So, what we're looking at here, this is, move this along. So these are those materials. That red line is the temperature delineation between are we a losing stream or are we a gaining stream? And kind of what was just alluded to there. So those fine, this shows up, right?
Not really.
It's a little pointy.
Can you make
Okay.
it in the lights a little bit, Christina? Or have it
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll do this. So the two on your guys' far right. That's where we get those fine grains. Is that better? Okay. Don't fall asleep on me. Stay with me. Actually, I had a presenter one that said, "It's okay if you listen to me with your eyes closed. I won't be offended." So those fine grain materials, essentially, if there's something preventing the water table topping from the stream, we're going to get warmer temperatures. But as long as they have an open dialogue, that's what we're seeing with those materials below, so that there's a bedrock or those coarse grain and they can interact. Boom, groundwater can be there, groundwater can support the river. We love it, that's what we want to see. If that's kind of confusing, think about it as the materials that are above, those streams. Imagine if you're a stream, I'm going to think about it like you're going on a road trip and you're filled up with water. It's like you got gas, you got water at the last gas station, and there's no more, if there's silt or clay, there's no more connections to groundwater, there's no more gas stations for the rest of your voyage. So I hope you got enough water to make it all the way to the estuary, or make it all the way to the next point. Whereas if you're one of these other materials, it's like you can fill up on groundwater, fill up on gas as you need to on your journey to get down. So those ones are going to be healthy, consistent streams, and the other ones are going to depend on could they fill up on enough groundwater before they interacted with that clay or that material to carry forward. So think about it like a gas station. It's your last chance stop, and then once you hit the clay, I hope you got enough water to make it. Okay. Yeah.
Just to be clear, this is the temperature of the water in the aquifer.
Thank you, my apologies. So far, this is all what the stream monitors have done, and I'm going to tie them in here very shortly. So this is all the temperature of the actual water in the stream, right? So groundwater mediates the temperature of stream flow, and essentially without it, it will warm up to, it'll follow whatever the air temperature is. It doesn't warm up to the same different, but it essentially follows it. Groundwater says, groundwater is like adding an ice pack in the summertime. It's like having your own cooler to take with you. So that groundwater is going to mediate the temperature. Right, juice. If I'm losing you on the concentration things, just stick with fingerprints. They all have their own fingerprint. Okay? And so we can tell which geologic formations are most important to low flows based on their fingerprint. When they hit the stream, that stream tells us where did that water come from, right? And that's really, really important. So you may have also guessed that we did not sit beside one spot for 4 years, and we did not walk all of these streams every single day for 4 years. So there was a really amazing group of people. Some of them are in this room right now. Quite a few of them are actually. It's very nice to see you all. We've been working together. They spent really the last 4 summers going out, collecting temperature, collecting that specific connectivity data, pretty much every week or every other week, depending on how many volunteers we had, from 21 all the way up to the end of 2024 here, and capturing how the river behaves at more than 75 different sites, which was across 15 different tributaries. They painted this entire picture I'm trying to now paint in front of you. So there's actually quite a few of them here, and I won't single them out that way. But can we all just give them a really big round of applause, whether they're in the room? Thank you all so much for showing up every week, for showing up for each other, and for being willing to learn sort of alongside us through this whole journey here. I don't think Pam is here, but she said, by God, if you try to teach me your, Pamela I know is here, but other Pam is not here. So if you try to teach me your whole thesis, I don't even know, anyways, she'll forgive me this, but someday I'll make her sit down for the rest of it. Right, and so it takes a lot to pull a story like this together. And this data, hopefully, can go on to provide a really good foundation for that. So just the next few slides I'm selfishly putting in. I'm just going to tell you all that right now. It's a quick aside about data and about citizen science. So if any of you are wondering what's going to happen to all of these things that we've learned, and we haven't even got to the now, so stick with me. What's going to happen to all of this? So the data is, all of this data that we've done is owned by Cowichan tribes. Us at UVic are simply the stewards, and right now it's digitally hosted on a platform called Annotated. So it wouldn't be as exciting in this conversation, but you could go download everything we just talked about and check it out for yourself. This slide is about quality control, which I know is not the most exciting thing, but I want to show this because this is all of the researcher collected data compared to the community collected data. And what you're seeing is the orange is how many had to be, how much housekeeping had to happen. So maybe it was the wrong input field or the decimal place was wrong stuff. Just a quick bit of tidying. And so the thing I wanted to point out of this, and then the bottom, if you're curious, and I'm not sure if you can read it with that detail, but it's the type of error. So you put the wrong location in, but you knew what it was. And so they all have pictures. It was easy to have some house cleaning. The reason why I wanted to take a minute for quality control and talk about this is because I didn't have to delete any community data. Less than 1%. Like I think I had to remove 3 inputs from community that were not usable. I had to do a bit more housekeeping on the back end than my own data. I mean, 5% of mine was, I still made mistakes. I still had to clean up decimal points and put things in right places. I'm still human, right? The reason I wanted to bring this up and point this out is because community science is still struggling. We have come a long way in the world for having community initiatives be taken seriously and be used in decision-making processes. But the sad news I'm going to tell you is that here in Canada, less than 50% of community science that is related to water, so any community-based monitoring, makes it into any level of decision-making. It's not great numbers, right? And that has less to do with the quality of the science than it does with the perception of community science. And while we've all come a long way, and people will say, oh my gosh, you did community science, that's so great, or this is such a good project, they say it, and it gets left on the table, and it doesn't make it up the next level. Part of that perception shift, essentially technology, a lot of things have sort of, even smartphones, the ability for me to collect data versus you collect data, and the complexity of the things that we're using, the capacity to use it is, or its usefulness is there, but decision makers still don't like to use it. And so my invitation is that you don't know when you're the decision maker, but if any of you ever come into the moment where you have a chance to use that community data, it's rooms like this where we slowly get that trickle-up effect, where hopefully it can and should be used. So there we go. That's my little soapbox. I did it. So I need to tie in one more piece. And again, just checking the time, I'm going to try and talk for about another 10 minutes. And that was kind of why I wanted to do questions along the way, so that we sort of acknowledge we've had a few of those along the way. I'm talking for 10 minutes, and then I'll cut myself off, and we can open up for the last 10 minutes for questions. Does that sound good? Timing-wise? Okay, great. Okay, what can we do in 10 minutes? Hopefully a lot. So, in addition to, we're going to call that the quality of the data, so water quality. That's the temperature and the minerals, the temperature and the conductivity. Outside of the community monitoring, I also did other monitoring. So I went around to 17 different locations, so all those tributaries that we monitored, and I actually measured the flow about twice a month. And so we're going to go a little graphy here. If the graph's too much, just close your eyes and listen to my words. But we'll all get through this, I promise. The bottom is the months. So we're looking at from June, July, August, and September. And then on the y-axis, we're looking at the flow or the discharge. So again, if we think about discharge, it's not just about how fast the water is moving, it's about how much it's moving. So think about, again, turning on your tap. If you really crank your tap, really high discharge. If you turn your tap down, really low discharge. But your tap is the same size, never changed, right? So we're looking at that. And what I wanted to be able to compare was to be able to say, are each of these areas producing as much flow as you would think they would? So you kind of, we compared it to what you would expect based off the size of the area of the basin. So what you're looking at here, I know there's a few different colors going on, but what I want you to look at is that light blue. The light blue is what you would expect for how much water to come out based off of just the size of the basin. So light blue is what you'd expect. If the bars go way above, it means it gave more than what you'd expect. And if the bars are less, then it underproduced, let's say it that way. The two colors are how much of it was surface water and how much was basal. So basal or groundwater is blue, surface water is white. So right now we would expect, hopefully to be about 50%. And look, these ones are producing way more than 50%. This is actually 90% of the flow in August. So this is a graph. I'm just going to show you where this was. This was taken at Burnt Bridge. Has anyone been to Koksilah River Park? Imagine most folks have, or at least know where. Yeah. So this spot that I'm talking about, whenever we measure stream flow, it includes everywhere further upstream of it. So that means that it's quite convenient, actually. That part is the cutoff point. So 50% of the watershed is upstream of it, 50% of the watershed is downstream of it. The take home that I want you to know out of this is that in August, the upper watershed, even though it's only half size, is producing 90% of all of our flow. So really, most of the water in the summer comes from above Bird Bridge, right? Now, the percentage, I always want to throw a caveat in here, in case we got any math folks keep me in. Percentages are kind of a tricky one to deal with because in theory, and I'm just going to throw this one caveat in, this is 90% of how much water goes past the provincial gauge. There's actually more water than that because people have been irrigating and taking some out, but I don't know how much was in there. So this is just compared to what we measured at the end. It doesn't include the additions and subtractions along the way. Does that kind of make sense? There's that little bit of a window where it's like, it's probably actually less than 90%, but I can't account for the water that was taken. We have a rough notion, but we never know exactly how much water is coming out when. So that was an example of flow on a really big level. I think I've got time. I'm going to walk us through one, maybe two examples of how this all comes together. So we're going to zoom in. Each one of these polygons, for the most part, is a place that we studied. It's a place that we spent time. So we're going to zoom in on Norrie Creek, and I'm trying to see who's here. Maybe we have a few folks who are monitoring. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Okay, here you go, guys. Here's some results from the tributary we're monitoring. So, what was going on there? So there's the little badges. Each badge is a site. The color of the site tells you whether it was gaining or losing, or whether you have connected or not connected, right? So, and then the colors that are, I know these are too small, so I'm just going to verbalize what you're seeing here. The white at the top is thin soil over bedrock, and then what you're seeing over here is fine grain that's also buried under thin soil. So what you're seeing is essentially the water that's in the stream, comes down off the hill, hits the fine sediment part, is no longer connected to groundwater, so it starts warming up. And then it flows through, and then this is actually the confluence. This is where it joins the main stem right here. So if you go back to thinking about it, it's like that last stop, right? It filled up on all the groundwater that it could up in the hills, and then when it hit the surface, it had to ride out whatever it had to get it to the confluence. And I can tell you from being standing at the confluence that there's a little tiny itty bitty trickle. Didn't die, but it barely makes it. So Norrie has, like that further up one has a bit more water, right? But you can kind of see that it kicks in there. That was the one at Fleetwood, the one that's still blue. Yeah, that's not. So it has warm streams because it's not connected to the water table, likely because of some clay or silt underneath. Again, I can't dig down in a million wells and figure it out. So that's the geology, and that's kind of the condition of the stream. Now if we look at how much water is there, and again, all you need to remember from this graph is there's, the flow is on the y-axis, time, the summer is that, and the light blue is what you would expect based off of the size. Look at how little flow we actually get. You actually almost can't even see the bars. They're just these teeny tiny little windows. So it should be, Norrie Creek, based on its size, is 2% of the whole watershed. So in theory, it should be contributing about 2% of the water in the summer. It barely contributes, doesn't even contribute 0.5%. So its geology doesn't allow it to have that same flow come through. Oh my gosh, we're gonna make one more example. Okay, I'm gonna squeeze one more in. Wild Deer Creek. Yeah, this is one that comes up for a few folks. Again, if you've been to, you might not even realize you've been to Wild Deer Creek, but if you've been to Koksilah River Park and you've done one of those stream crossings, on the far side, you've crossed over Wild Deer. So let's take a quick look at what's going on. So again, these little blue badges are the sites, and if you look, all of Wild Deer is gaining. That's great, good for Wild Deer. I didn't point this out before on the first one, but each of those badges also has a number in it. So I said that they all have a fingerprint. The type of material, the number indicates what type of is flowing through. And so most of Wild Deer here is mapped as thin soil and bedrock, but it also has a couple patches of some thin soil over top of coarse grains, over top of sand or gravel. If you look at this, there's a lake up here and there's this big patch of sand and gravel. And you would think, hey, that's probably where the water comes from. If you look at the fingerprint from the lake and you compare it to the fingerprint that makes it to the main stem, it's not the lake. There's actually an unmapped, there's a much bigger unmapped sand and gravel or some sort of coarse grain deposit here that hijacks the signature and keeps the water flowing. And so it's that that's keeping wild deer with these cool streams, and it's dependent on that groundwater for it. So now if we go look at, so how much flow are we actually getting from wild deer? So again, light blue is what you would expect, just based on the area. So wild deer is about 6%-ish of the whole watershed. And you can actually see that most of the time, look, I'm about 5% in June, 6% in July. Ooh, August crunch period is 9%. It's producing 1.5 times the amount of water you would expect based on its area because it has that access to those other aquifers. And it makes a really big difference. So you can now, if you want to, if you haven't already, you can flip over the other side of your little map, and that's going to show you this. So this is the relationship. So if it has a color, it means it's somewhere that we worked. The white just means that I didn't have a gauge on it. So there are some other little first order streams that we got as a program, but I didn't do a big summary of those. And so you can see now the relationship of groundwater and how it's keeping some of those alive. So sometimes we have groundwater present, but it has a lower contribution to stream flow, so that's our light blue. And then we have a strong groundwater connection, and it's kicking out a lot of water in the summertime, so that's where those coarse grain deposits really kick in, especially in the upper watershed being very important. And then for now, I'm still doing this, by the way. I'm still actively putting all this together. So the human altered ones I've just left as gray because their story is a little bit more complicated, and because they have Trollos Lake has the lake diked into the stream, and or Dugan Lake, excuse me, has it, and then Heatherbank Brook has some other human altered effects. So I got to hash out that story a little bit. And then Glenora and Newer, you know what I gave examples of, they have a really variable connection to groundwater because of those isolation points, because they get disconnected. Glenora actually produces way more than you'd expect, and Newer produces less. So what you're seeing there is an example of Glenora is where the clay window breaks and the water can get attached to it, and Newer is an example of the clay keeps them separated and keeps them apart. So, okay, I'm gonna flash through this in really quickly. So these are just general characteristics, and we often get to this point where we're like, yay, I figured something out, kind of. Well, now the thing is, now what, right? What good does this do? So the Koksilah Watershed, up until the community has spent a lot of time doing this, has essentially been a black box. We know that water came in, we know that there's a bunch of streams, and we didn't really know what happened, and then water left at the other end. And all of the decision points have been around a single spot, because fair enough, that's what we had consistent data for since the 1910s, of how should we manage this river, right? Ultimately, we're hanging out on a choose-your-own-adventure, right? It's really exciting, guys. It's really complicated, and the stakes are kind of high, but we're hanging out with a choose-your-own-adventure. So we're not doing goblins and caves, we're doing water governance. And if we want, if we want to make it to the treasure spot, if we want to make it to a happy, healthy watershed, we need to have more choices than just you die or you escape. We need more choices on the board. And so, hopefully, what we can do is make a decision tree for each one of those groundwater relationships, because they're going to need different solutions. That's what community has solved is kind of like the bones. It's up to us and our values as to what we're going to build off of them, right? So ultimately it's going to rain, and that rain is going to go into the geology. But what we do with it and how we try to support it, how we try to slow it down, where do we do that, right? It's a long line of compromises. It's a long line of choices ahead of us. But the goal out of all of this is to be able to make better choices and to not just have it be this ominous black box. And so, hopefully, I left 10 minutes for question. Hopefully, right, so what is groundwater? It's all the water below the water table. That's what we're talking about. And why do we care about it? It's because it keeps the river alive. It feeds us, it brings us a lot of joy. All of those places, I sort of intentionally did this. Whatever you might have wrote on one side of the map, not incidentally, the groundwater is on the other side. The groundwater is underneath supporting those places that you care about, right? So flip that back and forth. Think about which groundwater relationship is taking care of the place that you'd identify as important to you. Because it is there. Even if you just like to go there, if you flush a toilet there, it counts. It still counts. So that's why we care about it. And river health is going to be dependent on it because it's the gift that keeps on giving as long as you know how to take care of it. And you have to think future, you have to think, ahead. It's not about just taking care of now. Groundwater forces you to think further than the current moment. And hopefully that's what we can do. Hopefully now that we have a little bit better understanding of it, we can make some better choices. All right. I'm going to cut it off there, like 2 minutes ago. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for your attention. You got any questions for the end? I'm going to go 1 and then 2.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how you might have accounted for what was the covering for the riverbanks, and how that might have influenced the flow. I would think you get a better flow with an old growth biodiverse intact ecosystem rather than tree plantations or just something that's barren. So how did you figure out how the groundwater flows would be different depending on the land cover?
Yeah, so it's a really great question. And I'm going to say that we did not work at a scale that could compare land use processes. So often if you want to do that, you have something that's usually in a pristine state and you compare it side by side. What this monitoring program did was it took an inventory of what is, right? And that's also the reason why I only spoke to the geology. There's definitely a play of how those trees, how agriculture, how the river has changed over the years that would change some of these relationships. So ideally, hopefully, out of this watershed plan, we change the way we do things. And then in 10, 20, 30, 100 years, someone looks back at what we have, and then this is the baseline to see, did that change any difference? So I don't have the comparison in real time, right? It's sort of, we did the what are we now, right? Yeah. I will say, if you're curious, and I hope that it gets presented a bit more publicly, my counterpart, David, so he did some modeling scenarios of land use in the past versus land use present, and which land use has had changes. So there are some folks that are working on it. That's just not what we have for this one. Thank you. I'm going to go, where'd you go? Here? There, thanks.
I know you're here primarily about the river, but I live not within the Koksilah Watershed, neighboring to it. But what influence do wetlands have?
Yeah. So wetlands allow, it allows to change how infiltration works. So we love a wetland because as it rains, it's going to fill that up, and then that's going to cause it more storage and more time to slow down. And then in theory, it then has a slow release throughout the summer. And so it's like adding a storage tank. Now, the tricky part is that when all wetlands, all of these things, the aquifer, the river, everything switches between source and sink, supply and demand. The type of wetland, am I big and wide, am I flat and narrow, the shape of the wetland and some of the shape will decide when it switches from the source to the sink. And so we love it when it's a source, but at some point the wetland actually starts asking for water back. And so it's the timing of when that happens. In general, wetlands are a boon. But it's sometimes not just about making a wetland bigger, might not solve the problem of giving us a bigger tank to drain out, right? You have to think about the shape of the land there. So in general, it's another great storage option. I just always like to throw a caveat that no option doesn't come with, some consequences.
I just think that they're not appreciated for that.
Yeah, I mean, wetlands from a water perspective, from a diversity perspective, they make a huge difference, right? And maintaining those in a functional way is always a tricky one. I think here and then here. Yes.
So if I understand what you've said, in the watershed there are deposits of coarse material, pockets of coarse material that we didn't really know about perhaps that punch way above their weight with respect to providing summer water. And those are not mapped. So the question is, can you map them? Should we map them? And I guess, is there value in trying to protect them from, I guess, mining or paving or that kind of thing?
Yeah. So, I'm going to back this up a little bit. The deposits are mapped. They have never been mapped as an aquifer because they were not considered economically important at the time of mapping. Yes. How you label something impacts how anyone looks at it. So if anyone wanted to look at a map of aquifers, if you look at it, it just magically stops right here. It's like none of that exists. So if you change what you care about, you can give it a different label, and if you give it a different label, look at all the protection that kicks in under a different label, right? Labels come with consequences, but you can also use those consequences for good. It goes both ways. Now, I always shy away from, or this is not my job to decide. My job, I think, is to show you options, and then ultimately it's people in this room that will create those options. But I'm going to pose a question. So those coarse grains, this dark blue, oops, come back. The dark blue on your papers is arguably doing pretty well right now. Now, this light blue here, and I'm going to use this top corner. So this one here is generally called the West Koksilah, and then that big light blue, that is Waterloo Mountain. That's Fellows Creek. Anyone has ever heard that name before? So both of them have different patches of clear-cut logging on them. Fellows Creek has much less flow comparatively to the West Koksilah. And again, I've only been talking about summer so far, but I'm going to throw a little curveball in here just because I know this. You get the most amount of snow and rain on Fellows because it's the highest point of elevation. And so, in theory, you could, and actually, sorry, I know too much about this one, so I can't help myself. I'm doing it. We're doing a real quick side tangent, but it's worth it, I promise. This is something I think everyone should know. We want aquifers to recharge. In order for an aquifer to recharge, you need things like mycelium, you need things like established soil. You need water to very slowly, with time, sink into the ground. So it snows in these high elevation points. And when they're treed, or if you're thinking about, well, what does it mean to protect these places, in both places, in the wintertime, trees would help slow it down. It would help things sink into the ground. And so, in contrast, it can, if there's no trees, then that water flows straight into the stream. And sometimes you want that. Sometimes you want the water to go into the stream and keep the stream flowing that way. So it depends on what you want. So the thing I'm posing, I guess, is that do you conserve the place that already has good storage regardless of the tree cover? Maybe you can make it better. I don't know right now. But maybe there's such good soil there and you can actually fill up the tanks some more. So maybe you invest in making that landscape hold as much water as possible. Or do you invest in the place that gets the most precipitation, even though it doesn't have as much stored on its own? If you slow that water down, kind of do you fix what's broken or do you save what's good? Right? That's ultimately what I'm kind of trying to push forward here. And that's not, I don't have the answer. You have to weigh the pros and cons, you have to think about it, but what this is showing is that the decision for these two places shouldn't be the same, right? Ultimately. And so if you think about this and how, I'm also, two things. I am not a forest hydrologist and I am not a snow expert. So this is all things I've kind of learned peripherally that have influenced how I see this. Right, but you have to think about, in theory, you get it all to a certain level, but first you got to do triage. You have to decide, do you save the patient in black, or do you, and those are choices that we make as a community, actually. Our values make those choices. What is best is decided by someone. No one is asking the river or the tree what's best. We're deciding that, whether the river is an entity of its own. If it can make a choice for itself, I'm not quite sure if we'd want to know. It would be great. Okay, I think we went here, and then, we'll work across that line.
Is there a level of water below this, that's surface water, which is at a much deeper depth, which is not being tapped at all?
Okay, so depending on where you're at in the world, I would say Yes, but here on Vancouver Island, if you go down, and here where we're physically standing, we have to go probably anywhere from 100 to 200 meters to hit bedrock. And then there's another hit bedrock. But essentially for where we are, quite simply, if there's no standing ground, you hit bedrock right away. Water can only move through pores or cracks. The deeper you go on the bedrock, the fewer cracks there are. So actually the majority of groundwater that moves through bedrock moves through in the top 10 meters. And then the more deep you can, the driller over here can kick me in the teeth very much. But so this is a general rule of thumb. The deeper you go in bedrock, the fewer cracks you have. Now as a caveat, you could talk about things like faults or crack lines, and there's preferential lines that it'll follow. But really, for somewhere that's bedrock, you get less water the deeper you go.
And just to add to that, if you go deep enough, almost anywhere, you eventually end up with soil water.
There you go. There's the. So if you I grew up in the prairies. You can go deeper and hit very, very different types of water because we don't have bedrock so close to the surface. You got to go along those things.
They're having problems in Iran at the moment from kind of overuse of water, I think it is, and quite a lot of that is from drilling deep water.
Okay. You go this way.
So here's a read on 365 days a year. The rest goes into the house, through the house system, into drains, into the septic field, and it percolates 365 days a year. So if you add up all the water that we use, 100% of it's discharged back to the surface, but nearby where the well was, relatively speaking. So, well, highly variable from, obviously geology, but how long, what sort of range in the Koksilah of time does it take for that water to get back to a usable location in the water table?
Where do you live and how deep is your well?
Kingburn area.
Do you know how deep your well is?
Pardon me?
Do you know how deep your well is?
Yeah, 45 meters. Water level 17 meters.
You look at the well profile. Again,
But I'm just curious from
Yeah.
all over.
On just a point blank guess, it's funny. I got someone to double check me here, which is hilarious. So that you're, depending on what type of material it is, like the fact that you're in Kingburn and the fact it's not very deep, you're on the scale of, maybe days to months. If you were in somewhere with bedrock, you might be in the scale of months to years.
Or decades in some cases.
Or decades,
Yeah.
right? But just as a really just ad hoc, ballpark number, and that gives you. And so another thing that I think we forget about sometimes is that groundwater goes down, but groundwater also moves with the shape of the land. So the water that you're getting might have actually come from up the hill, and the water that you're putting back down is feeding someone else's groundwater further down.
From your neighbor's well.
I get that, having worked in groundwater for a long time. I get that, but the key thing for me is that all these homes are discharging right back where they drew their water, and it's nonstop. Septic fields just continuously weep away. So water in, water out. Rainwater, same thing. It's going to ground and it's taking weeks to months, but it's continuous through the year. It's always doing that. Unlike in bigger municipalities, say, where water's pulled out of here, transported many kilometers away, and discharged potentially, even like locally, North Cowichan water can go to Maple Bay, and boom, that stuff is going down and out right into Saltchuck. So a little bit different, so I'm just curious how long you think it takes.
Yeah, I kind of thought of that, and that's already somehow disappeared. We'll see if it comes back around. I don't know. Anyone else? And I'm just gonna say we are over time, so maybe.
Last question?
Sure.
You last.
Or is it, well, I'm gonna.
2 more questions.
2 more. Yeah, I was gonna say we'll do the last 2 and then we're on there because I just want to respect people's time. But I can hang out for those a while.
Okay, quick question. Is there a student coming after you? And is there a chance for us to get back to the citizen science again?
To my knowledge, right now, no. I am the end of the project. In case anyone didn't know this, I became the student who came after me. I started as a master's student and then became I was supposed to do the agriculture part and someone else was supposed to come to the forestry part. And I very foolishly he was like, do you want to do the whole thing? And here we are, 5 years later. So I don't know, Patrick, I don't know what will come as far as that type of monitoring. I will say a reality is that long-term monitoring has to occur. And so part of the planning process, and I will say this also as another nod to all the work that people in this room have done, we're going to be at least part of the bones. We're the skeleton structure of how that long-term monitoring will take place. Obviously there's riparian monitoring, there's a lot of different kinds. But from what we've learned, if it's not you, you laid the groundwork for the next monitors to come. And I want you to be really proud of that. I hope you're really proud of that. Yeah, take the next one.
So the groundwater then is our natural refrigeration, essentially keeps them cool. But to follow on with the wetlands, so there was research about 15 years ago, U.S. Pacific Northwest that said small wetlands in headwater areas that were 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters by 150 centimeters, so really small. You know, one track or one tire away from getting driven over. Those were important for controlling stream temperature for the entire length of streams all the way down to the ocean. So I'm wondering then is that, so groundwater in Koksilah then is controlling how much of the water temperature, and then have you been able to pull out small headwater wetlands too, and what is their impact on water temperature?
Yeah, so in the same way that like I can't pull up a land use thread, it's a muddled signature, and I've kind of struggled with that, both sort of working through this a little bit, but yeah, it's in that, and I will also say that like it's kind of all mixed in on that one, and so I think ultimately this is already happening. So I think it's okay for me to say it. So like investigating into the wetlands in the upper watershed is currently happening via the product. So these questions that you're having, people are starting to look at them. They're starting to look at scale and size, and it's all being mapped. So not my wheelhouse, but someone has their eyes on it.
Good. Yeah. I mean, is there there's some importance there around buffering, etc. With trees, and what are the widths the buffer should be, but in particular these headwaters, we should be protecting the small wetlands for that initial, at least, start of controlling stream temperatures. Yeah, and not to catch you up, but just trying to see that,
Yeah, the plug and play of it.
Yeah.
I'm going to hand there anything.
So, thank you so much, Kristine Disney. Water well driller in me, but I do have a couple of takeaways from what you said. One is that groundwater is totally awesome and essential for our watershed, and actually for our lives in the Cowichan Valley. We're so lucky to have wonderful aquifers here that provide the vast majority of us with all of our water needs. And I also want to take the time, if we could everybody who has participated in this citizen science collection, could you please stand up so that we can actually see who you are? Could everybody who's done some of this stand up? Thank you so much. Thank you. You're contributing to the knowledge base. If we don't know what we've got, if we can't measure it in some way, we can't manage it. So that's, I think, part of what this ultimately is being able to measure and manage our water resources. And the Koksilah is a good example of something that really does need our attention. And the other takeaway, I think, is that you said because there are so many gaps in our knowledge, we need to drill a whole bunch of them. And that might be just a well driller. That might be the well driller as well. So I would like to extend our thanks to the Watershed Board. We have a gift for you here, Christina. It's a locally knit Cowichan Watershed Board, Cowichan First Nations food, and a gift card from us. Thank you so much very much for making, and all of your effort and all of the time you've devoted to our community. So when Christina is rich and famous, all of you people who have helped out, you're going to share